Hello and welcome to this new video series, Get into Git. Now, if you are one of the many people that are learning Python and getting into APIs, you really should be learning Git. Now, in this series, we're going to be going through the basics and then going a bit more advanced in what is quite a tricky topic, but one that is very useful once you know how. In this first video, we're going to be asking Git, what is it? Then trying to clear up Git versus GitHub. I'm then going to do an install on Windows, and I'm going to show you what is probably going to be your first steps with Git, a Git clone, and then a Git push to update a repo. Okay, Git, what is it? Well, it's distributed version control, which is used to track and coordinate file changes in a shared repo or repository. Now, it's mainly used for code, but it can be used to version control pretty much any file type. So if you're the type of person that's learning to code and currently you're emailing around your scripts, and as each time you change one of your scripts, you're saving it as version 1, version 2, version 3, filling up your hard drive with all these different scripts, you really want to be using Git to track the changes of your code. Git is free and it is open source. There's cross OS support, so it's on Linux by default and it is supported on Windows, but the install it's not tricky, but there's a few steps to it, so I thought I would run through that. Now, what is GitHub then? Well, GitHub.com is a private company which hosts public and private repos for version control, which utilizes Git. But Git can run on any server locally, the actual processes of Git. GitHub is like cloud storage based around Git, but they've also added lots of their own features which help with collaboration especially, and they've gamified the whole Git process with their green tiles, which we'll see later. Now, in your organization, you might have something called GitHub Enterprise, which is an on-premise version of github.com, which can be used for internal software projects. Now, one of the things with github.com is that by default, the repositories are public, so anyone can look at them. You can have private repositories which you have to pay for, but obviously they're still held in some remote storage. For some companies, for security reasons, etc., they like to make sure that all their internal development can benefit from the features of GitHub, but is on the corporate network and behind their own firewall. So GitHub Enterprise is for them. Okay, that's a quick introduction to Git and GitHub. Let's get on with the install onto Windows. For this demo, I'm using a new Windows 10 VM. Here it is. It is Windows 10 Pro N 1709. So with most Linux distributions, Git is installed by default when you boot up. But with Windows, you do have to install it. So what we do here is we go to git-scm.com, navigate to the download for Windows. I'll put a link in the description and just download the file. I've already done this to speed things up. Here it is. Once it's downloaded, double click, of course, to start the install. Okay. So select the defaults to start with. Now this is where it gets interesting. This is essentially why I'm showing you this. It says here that Vim is the default editor for Git for Windows only for historical reasons, and it is highly recommended to switch. Now most people find Vim pretty hard to get their heads around, and especially to save anything and to exit. There's other editors that are available by default here. This nano editor is a bit easier to use, so I'm going to select that one. And from now on, I'm just going to go with the defaults. So we go through, and that's starting to install. It will take a couple of minutes, so I'm going to skip ahead. Okay, so the Git setup wizard has now completed. You can launch it from here, but I'm going to uncheck that and just finish. Hit the start button so you can see what has been installed. There we go. So what we have, if you see it, that you see recently added, of course, but if we go to this Git folder, you'll see it's Git Bash command and GUI. Now, if we open up Git Bash, what this is it's like a Unix command line on Windows which we can use for Git. Now, there's lots of different GUIs, such as GitHub Desktop and Git Kraken, which can be used. And I should mention that a lot of IDEs have Git functionality within them, which all suggests that they're going to make Git a bit easier for you. As I mentioned, learning Git is pretty difficult, very steep learning curve with it. But just like training wheels on a bike, I think that these GUIs, they actually hold you back. They make it a bit easier to start with, but they hold you back from really going deep and really understanding Git and speeding up and utilizing it to its fullest. So from scratch, I would very much recommend sticking with Git command line. So using Git Bash here for everything that you're going to do. I would stop anyone that was going to use Git Desktop from doing so. Okay, so what this has given us, like I say, it is like a Unix style command line here, so we can do things like this within Windows. Right, I'm going to navigate to the folder I've created, which I am going to clone my Git repo down to, which is this /code. Okay. Now that we've got Git installed, I just wanted to illustrate the next step. So we're going to do a Git clone, which means that we clone down a repo from github.com to our, we're going to create a local repo of it. So from GitHub, so essentially from cloud storage, we're going to locally copy the repo from up there down to our local machine. And then we're going to make some changes to it, and we're going to do a git push to push the local changes up to the server on github.com, to the remote repository. So it's git clone to come down to your local machine, and then it's a git push to push up to the github.com server. Now I've jumped over to github.com. This is my profile. If you don't have a profile, you can open one for free. You just go to github.com, put in a username and follow the instructions. It's pretty easy. Now, once you've got your username and password sorted and got your profile open, you'll have a page similar to this. I am going to create a new repository for cloning. So I'll go over to repositories here, hit this green button to create new. Okay, and it's see this create a new repository. Right, so I'm going to be the owner. Fine, we're just doing the basics now. So I'll give it a name, and it is going to be abc-test. There'll be a cross there if that repo already exists under that owner. It's going to be a public repo. As I said earlier, you can have private ones, but you have to pay for those. I'm going to initialize that with a repo, and you can include a git ignore there. We'll look into that in later videos. So I'll just leave that as it is and create this repo. Okay, and as far as that, it has been completed. Right, so here we have a new URL for this repository. You can see that I have created it with the README. So the README is rendered here like this, is Markdown. So if you write a README in Markdown, it is presented there, and that's where you can include instructions to your repos. More on that in later videos. So what we are going to do is to clone this. So we create so remember that this only exists up on the github.com servers at the moment, and we want to work on this repository. So we want to clone that down to our local machine, and the way that we do that is this green button here. We hit that and we can use this to clone with HTTPS. Now you can clone with SSH. If you hit that, it gives you the URL. But to do that, you have to have added the SSH keys to your GitHub profile. Haven't done that yet. That's later videos as well. I'm sure you're getting the impression that there's a lot to this, which there is. So we're going to try and keep it simple for now. Right, so cloning with HTTPS, there's the URL that we need. Copy it there, as you can see, copied. So we jump over to my Windows 10 device where I want to clone this repo. So I'm already in that code folder that I want to clone into. To clone, I do a Git Clone. I've got the URL, so we'll paste that in. There we are. And hit return. So as you can see, cloning into ABC test. Now, if you do an ls, what you'll see is that a folder's been created for the repo. So that's really easy to forget. I sometimes make that mistakes and carry on expecting there to be Git repo at this level. You have to change into the folder that you have just downloaded. And as you can see there, so we've moved into that folder and we now have this here, master. So that's the branch that we're in. We're in the master branch and we're going to stick in that at the moment. Branching is a major part of Git and one of the really great things about it, but more on that in later videos. Okay, so first command, let's do a Git Status. So this is a command I use a lot as I go through. Git Status essentially gives you a lot of useful information about what's happening with Git. So if you're using the command line, this is my real go-to command. So what you can see there, on branch master, your branch is up to date with origin/master. Now the origin is the remote server. If you want to have a look at that, you can do this, git remote -v, and what you see is the URL that we pasted in for the origin. There you are. Okay, now what we should do is I want to make sure that Git is aware. So the first time that you use this, what you have to do is tell Git who you are. So you need to include your user email and your username for GitHub, because when you're making your changes and you want to commit them and then push them up to GitHub, it has to include the information about, obviously, the identity of who is making these commits. So what we do is it's git config global, it's user.email, and then in brackets I put my email, which is associated with my github.com user profile. Good. And I need my username as well. So that's Joe Neville and it's user.name. Okay, so Git will now know in its configuration file who I am for my when I want to commit and when I want to push. Right, so we've got the empty, except for the readme. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, so we've got the readme in there. What I want to do is I want to locally add a file and then push that up to the server. So let's create, what we can do here is, because it's a Unix style command line, we can just do touch, and I will call this test123.txt. Okay, so that creates that file. Good. And we do a git status, and that's what I mean about git status, is that it gives you a lot of useful information about where you are. Sorry. So branches up to date, etc., etc. But now we have an untracked file, and it tells you use Git Add to include in what will be committed. Okay, so the point is that in your local repo, you've now got a file which isn't being tracked by Git. So tracked by Git is essentially that it's checking for changes on this file. If you've got quite a lot of files in your local directory, you might only want Git to track some of them. I sometimes do that where I've got kind of scratch files and whatever that I don't want to push up to the remote server that is just for my local work. So this allows you to tell Git what files it should track. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Git Add. So I do a Git Add. Now you can do essentially a wildcard with this and do a git add dot, which will take everything in the directory and start tracking that. I think that's bad practice, because if you do that each time, it's very likely that what you're going to do is you're going to tell Git to track something that you don't want to push to the remote server, and you're going to end up making a bit of a mess with those files, and that's where people come unstuck with Git a bit. So I think it's really good practice to state the file name specifically of the files that you want Git to track. So I always put in specifically the file that I want. So Git Add test123.txt. Okay, so now again, going back to Git Status, you can see changes to be committed. Okay, so we've got this new file. It's telling us, so what it's done, the Git Add has added our new file, our test123.txt. It's put it into essentially the staging area. Once a file is in the staging area, you can do a git commit, which is like a save point. Essentially, it's like a save point. Okay, so we've got the new file, and it's telling us there, like I said, Git Status is very useful because it tells you how to take that file off. So imagine I did that wildcard and I pushed up and I put into the staging area some files that I didn't want to then go up to my remote github.com server. It's telling me I could do a git reset head and the file number to actually unstage it, to basically undo that git add. Okay, but this is fine. So it's in my new file, that's in the staging area, and I want to essentially save this. So it's git commit -m for message, and here you are supposed to put a good descriptive, like comprehensive message about what this commit is actually doing. Very simple here because I've just got this empty file that I've created. But if you can imagine, once you start using Git in anger and you've got lots of different code, so imagine like if I'm putting together some Python and I kind of add a load of doc strings in, and then I do a commit with my doc strings, or I refactor some code. The git commit message is very useful when you or other people want to check through what each change has been made where. So it's very good practice to make sure that you've got a good commit, very descriptive commit message. So this is just, don't just do things like first commit, second commit, things like that, because that in larger projects you'll get unstuck with that, and it's not helping yourself in the future or your colleagues. Okay, so in this one it's just very simple, add 23.txt. Okay, fine, right, let's commit that. Excellent, so that worked. Go back again, same process. Git status. Right, now this is slightly different. So your branch is ahead of origin/master by one commit. So we've got the cloud storage of github.com. We cloned that down, we added a file to it, and then we made a commit. So our local Git knows that we are one commit ahead of the remote server, because the local file is not up on the server yet. We've got a commit locally which we need to push up to the remote server, and it's actually telling us that. So this is why, you know, at each stage you can rely on Git Status to at least give you some useful information. So you've got there, use git push to publish your local commit. So use git push to actually push the file up to the cloud storage of github.com. So let's go ahead and do that. Git push. Now I should say, I've in prep for this video I went through this a few times on this VM. So I did find the first time that I did this is where GitHub will ask you to put in your username and your password. I'm not expecting it to do so at this point, but just be aware that when you try to do the push, you might have to log into GitHub yourself to push to your repo. So I'm going to do a git push now. Okay, there we go. So you get this information about writing the objects, and the local master is pushed up to the remote master. Now let's do a git state. As always, we do a git status again, and we see that we are up to date. If I jump over to github.com, there we are. So this is, I haven't refreshed this page yet. So as you see, we only had one commit and we had the README file. If I refresh this. There we are. Excellent. Okay, so now we've got 2 commits, so you can see my commit there. So there you are, add test123. That's my commit message. So that's why it's really important to include a descriptive commit message, and you can see my test123.txt file. To reiterate then, we created a new repo up on github.com. We cloned it down locally. We added a file, test123.txt. We did a git add, a git commit, and then we did a git push back up to the server, and we could see the commits from the local up on github.com. That's it for this first video. As I'm sure you can appreciate, there's plenty more to learn about Git. I'll be looking at exciting stuff like branching and forking repo and different Git workflows in subsequent videos. Please do comment, like, share and subscribe. That's all for now. My name's Joe Neville. Thanks for watching and goodbye.